Good morning and welcome to Retirement Tax Matters. I'm Adam Reed, got Garrett Crawford, our CFP over here, and you're joining us here on our show where we like to tackle different advanced tax planning tips, tricks, kind of an educational platform for helping high net worth retirees learn more about kind of what's on the horizon if you're heading into that season of life, or maybe you're in the thick of it right now and trying to plan through some things and thinking, hey, what are a couple little things I can do to get an extra percentage point here or there, and man, we're here. We're your tour guides. We're along for the ride with you. So check us out on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. Like, subscribe, follow, all those fun things.
A lot of good resources out there, I think.
A lot of good resources. So and check out, even on our website, we have free resource, 6 high net worth retiree checklist, 6-point checklist for kind of getting ready to rock and roll.
It's a great place. You know, it's not going to be the be-all, end-all resource for you, but it does two things. It really kind of gives you an initial checklist if you've never thought about what retirement would look like and some of the things that we're talking about. But second, it just kind of keeps you in the communication channel. We're sending these things out every week, and I think people, would enjoy that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess enough about us and what we do. Let's dive into the topic for this week.
Let's do it.
We have covered a lot of things, I feel like, with taxes and Roth conversions, and now one that maybe has an emotional piece to it as well. I think we'll dig into that some today. But talking through kind of the surviving spouse tax brackets. And so a lot of the people we work with, a lot of you maybe listening are married and are filing jointly on your taxes and are planning that way. But sooner or later, one of you, statistically will be gone and the other one will be left to deal with the finances and kind of the burden of shifting tax brackets. And so wanted to dig into some of that today. I think I'll start this with, we hear a lot of times like, okay, my tax bracket once I get into retirement, I've got Social Security, maybe pensions and annuities, maybe some IRA income, and I just know what that'll be, and that's my tax bracket. I guess enlighten me, kind of tell me, what does that look like then to plan for if a spouse passes? What does it look like when things change?
Yeah. Let's start here because I think I was talking to somebody last night. They were in college and they're going to school to be some type of physician, and they said they were interested in surgery. And I thought, man, I would never want to do that. I don't think that I'm made up to go in and repair somebody that's going through trauma. And as I was preparing for this podcast this morning, I realized that because I'm a financial planner, I remember the first year I came to work and I saw my first death certificate, and I thought, ooh, that feels uncomfortable. Yeah. Thinking about somebody's death, having to look at a death certificate, and I can only imagine there is a general uncomfortability about planning for our end of our life. And I think sometimes as a financial planner, it can be this theoretical conversation. Oh yeah, when you die, taxes, whatever's left over for a spouse. And I want to acknowledge two things. One, the numbers do matter, but two, not everybody comes to a topic like this really excited to talk about Roth conversions and tax planning. And when I die, making sure that I have the most money for my spouse. There are going to be some people that are just naturally wired to have this conversation. I see them all the time. They'll come in at 60 and they'll say, now what happens when I die? And then I'll have other clients where that is not something they want to talk about. And even if we approach that subject, it's kind of deflecting, or it just feels uncomfortable. And so as we talk about the passing of a spouse and financial planning, I first and foremost don't want to come across as a calloused conversation, but I do think it's really important. And I would also add some context that probably the earlier you do this in retirement, the earlier you do it in life and you think about it, one, you'll have the mental acuity and sharpness to handle it. But second, it's not as fun. It's not as easy to have a conversation at the end of your life when you're going through hard things. So like a lot of things in life, I think sometimes planning ahead can be really important. And so with that kind of preface, I feel like understanding what happens to a surviving spouse if you're married after you die is very important because there's a difference between a married filing jointly rate, the tax bracket that you're being charged, and the individual tax bracket that you would be in if you're no longer married. And an inevitability of life is that we will all die. I hope everybody listening to this podcast, you and your spouse live to 100. But where the financial planning comes in is what happens when one of us doesn't. Yeah. And what if we both live to an average life expectancy? Great. What if we live over an average life expectancy? But specifically for today, do Roth conversions make sense if we're planning for what happens if one of us dies early? And it's not, we won't go into this rabbit hole, but it's not unlike people who buy term life insurance. Do you think you're going to die in your 30s? I have a term life insurance policy. Do I think I am? I think the chances are low, but I still have that protection built in for myself because, I want my family to be taken care of. And so I think that's the direction that we're going to go today.
That makes sense. So maybe somebody's listening to this and they're saying, okay, my ears are perked up. I need to be thinking about these things. If that person says, well, what is kind of the benefit to planning now? Like, what is the real kind of the dollar amounts or the tax brackets? How much are those really affected? Because I'd imagine I'm guilty of this. I've been married 6 years now, and so I haven't looked at I don't think I've ever looked at the single tax rates. And so some of the people watching this have maybe been married 30, 40, 50, 60 years since they're like single rates. I haven't looked at that since the 40s or 50s.
And I think even as a financial planner, financial planners in general can be guilty of that. Like, I'm married and I know my income and I'm pretty familiar with the married filing jointly rates. And I had an appointment a few weeks ago and it was somebody married filing separately, which I don't come across that often. And I got into IRMAA rule. I was like, man, these numbers are low. They're going to be hammered with Medicare IRMAA premiums. And so if you're married, it's not just something you think about. And so I've got my sheet here of tax brackets. This is for 2025 when we're doing it. And I'm going to throw out a couple ballpark numbers here. And so don't get too attached on the specific number. It's a principle because things could change by the time you watch it. But let's start with a good example. This podcast is made for high net worth retirees. We talk about somewhere in between the $2 million, $8 million range. More where maybe you have more wealth, more accumulated in your investments than some of your friends. But there's also this other stratosphere out there: estate planning and estate tax. Business owners, they're making lots of money, and that's not who I'm talking about. But let's say for the person watching this podcast, let's say they're between like $250,000, $350,000 of income. But let's do the lower end of that. And I think $250,000 of income is a really interesting number that I think a lot of people that are watching this could hit. And while you're married, a $250,000 taxable income would put you in the 24% tax bracket. Now, that doesn't mean every dollar is getting taxed 24%. That's another topic for another day. But your last dollars are getting taxed at 24%. Now, if you are an individual person and you're making $250,000, in fact, the cut here is $250,525. If you're over $250,525 as a non-married individual person, your tax bracket is not 24%, 35%.
Shoot, big jump.
Big jump. And so it's not uncommon in the high net worth retiree land that we work with that, each spouse has a Social Security benefit check. Maybe one spouse, maybe both spouse have some type of pension. They could have an annuity that they bought years ago that's paying income out. And they're also having RMDs from a traditional IRA, pre-tax IRA that they are taking money from. And they eclipse that $250,000 number. And a lot of people might think, when my spouse passes, they're going to have less income. And so they probably would drop down to be an equivalent 24. It'd have to drop down between $103,000 and $197,000 in 2025. So there is a chance that maybe Social Security falls off. Maybe you have a pension that's a 50% survivor. But I just see it more often that doesn't happen.
Well, and I think too, it even kind of hamstrings, even if it does drop, it just leaves us a lot less room to play, or for people listening, it leaves a lot less room to do some of these tax projections that we're hammering into everybody's heads and Roth conversions. Because now it's, oh wow, I've only got like $20,000 left in this tax bracket, where, 5 years ago when my spouse was living, maybe we had a lot more room to work with. And so it kind of puts you in a position where I'm not into that 35% bracket, but this $1.5 million IRA I've got, doing a $10,000 Roth conversion every year is really not going to put a dent in it.
Yeah,
and so it kind of hamstrings you.
Yeah, the other thing I just remembered is that when you go down to a single rate, your Medicare premiums can cost more. So it says, I was looking here, 2025, if you're single and your income was like $250, you'd be in the next to highest level of Medicare Part B and D income charges. It says $591 a month that you'd be paying for Medicare Part B. So not only do you get hit on taxes, but also Medicare can jump in there. So let's say you have Social Security that falls off, maybe a pension. I think what retirees can lose sight of is this idea that RMDs are growing and growing and growing. And so if you're sitting there married and your income is somewhere around $250,000, if you think that could be about the same, or it could even grow with RMDs, you have a tax quandary that you need to have some pre-planning and forethought on. And really, maybe we'll talk about it eventually, maybe we want to go there next, but it's doing Roth conversions in order to, maybe you're in maybe your current married filing jointly is $250,000. You've got some room to go. The top of the 24% tax bracket is $394,000. So what would it look like to go ahead and accelerate income from a future RMD year into the 24% rate that if a spouse were to pass, maybe it doesn't put them up into the 35% tax bracket?
Yeah. I think that's a good segue for us. Is we have a lot of clients, we talked before, sometimes it's husband, sometimes it's wife. Normally there's one person that likes to quarterback the finances. And it seems like that person typically likes to have things buttoned up. Yeah. The person leading the finances in the home typically is not your all over the place, shooting from the hip person. And so how can we help inform and educate? What do we do with clients to help them in their 60s have things buttoned up, so when they're in their 70s and 80s and they're maybe caring for a spouse on hospice, they're not scrambling to do last minute things to try to set themselves up and their estate for the future. But how can we let them kind of inform them in a way that in their 60s they can start planning and doing some of these things for the future?
Yeah, and so I think it's a self advertising thing here, but I think conversations like this, just to get it on your radar, the earlier in life that this could happen is really important. I take a step back a little bit. When I came into this industry, I was learning financial planning, investment management. And I remember sometimes simplifying the Roth conversion analysis from, and I think it was common, and it's not even wrong, but it was a simplistic view, and it's kind of like all calculator based. And it's, okay, if I'm working, you may be watching this and you may still be working, and your income is high, and you're thinking, there's no way my tax bracket's going to be as high in retirement as it is today. And so the common rule of thumb is if my taxes are higher today than they will be in the future, I need to contribute to a pre-tax IRA. I don't need to do a Roth conversion, because why would I pay taxes at 35% or 32% when I'm thinking it's going to be 24% in retirement? And in general, I agree with that. Why, if your tax bracket really is going to be 24 or later, why pay tax at 32%? I'm not anti-traditional IRA or pre-tax. In fact, I have clients where I recommend do not do Roth conversions. And then there's the other side where if you're younger in your career, maybe you've been out of work, there's a pause, maybe you have an inheritance coming in retirement and you think your taxes are going up. It probably does make sense if you're in the 24% tax bracket to do a Roth conversion, because in retirement, it's going to be a higher tax bracket. And so I think from a math side, we sometimes get lost in that discussion of what does the calculator say I'm going to end up with the most money when I'm 85? And I think these ideas of protecting a spouse, what happens if I, die earlier than I'm expecting, those are what I would call a non-financial benefit of considering a Roth conversion earlier in your retirement rather than waiting later in life. And we've just had situations where, as I've run the numbers, the difference between doing a Roth conversion or not, from a pure math calculator sense, it's kind of close. It's like maybe you'll come out ahead, maybe you'll not come out ahead. But I think there's something to, what if you died early and your spouse doesn't move up to the 32% or doesn't move up to the 35%? They have more money to live on for maybe 20 years or more. That's a benefit. It's almost like an insurance built into a Roth conversion. And then I think there's also another element where not only could it protect a spouse based on your unique situation, but the other one is paying tax on your money now, being free from having to worry about what Congress will do with future tax rates, and knowing that you've paid that tax now and you're free of that money, I think is a really powerful motivator. And so I think that conversation about what's my income now, what's it going to be later, should be a bigger conversation about, we want to look at that. We don't want to do anything silly or kind of dumb, but let's also factor in the non-financial benefits of doing a Roth conversion, protecting a spouse, maybe a spouse having to not worry about taxes as much, and then the final bonus is if there's money left over for kids, then they don't have to pay taxes for 10 years. The only other little tag I would throw in here is that we're currently working through a situation with a new client where they are older, a spouse is on hospice, and really our first, as soon as we get the information from them, a tax return, I'm already thinking, okay, what happens next year? Hopefully he'll live for a while. We were talking about maybe hospice isn't the exact same thing as it used to be, but if that client were to pass and left a remaining spouse, probably a Roth conversion this year is going to make sense, and we want to really do as much as we can, because this will be the last year that they'll be married filing jointly. And I've had that situation before where we're scrambling in the midst of a sorrowful time in life for a client and trying to make sure they pay less taxes. So I think your initial question, the sooner you handle it in your 60s and 70s, maybe the more time the Roth has to grow, but the less you'll have to worry about it later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a heavy topic, and it's funny. I come from kind of a life insurance background, so I feel like a lot of the conversations I was having was around like, hey, when someone goes, there wasn't a lot of, hey, let's plan for the exciting futures of our college education. It was, hey, when one of you goes, what do we do? And so it's interesting kind of how different our world, it feels heavier to talk about. But I do think getting ahead of it in your 60s and kind of planning for, hey, how do we approach this? And then that way when you get there, it's not, oh my gosh, what do we do? Or, man, I'm torn up about this and I'm all over the place. Now let's talk about it. It's, hey, we know what we're doing. I can be there for my spouse, love on them, and be there with the family.
And I think we're talking about this, the title being a tax shock for a surviving spouse. And that's really, it's like we want to remove less things from a surviving spouse. We don't want there to be a financial shock on top of everything else. And so, the devil is in the details in these conversations. You can't listen to this and know exactly what to do. Everybody's going to be unique. I just am an advocate and a proponent for this type of conversation to be bigger in the financial planning space, and I think it is. But it's another reason that we're doing this educational resource hub and advanced tax planning for high net worth retirees. Is because y'all need to be having these thoughts and planning discussions.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's our goal, is to kind of poke and prod and engage in conversations and thoughts about, what do I do? How do I do this?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're here for. So appreciate you guys joining us today with Retirement Tax Matters. Check out the website, retirementtaxmatters.com, and follow along on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. I think I finally nailed it this week. Every week I'm like, are we anywhere else? Where are we? But I think that's where we're at. So thank you all for joining us, and keep following along with us. Hope you have a great day.
Yep. Thanks so much for listening to Retirement Tax Matters. As always, the ideas we share here are for educational purposes, and we do our best to get it right, but this isn't a substitute for specific tax or financial advice, because a truly effective strategy is always built around your personal situation. For more resources and to see our full disclosure, visit us at retirementtaxmatters.com.